QuickBooks just didn't real time reconcile. A lot of the process was the same. It's just you couldn't really rely on the information. I would, categorize a transaction and then all of a sudden I'd break everything. I just had one too many times where I'm like, this is just so frustrating and I don't feel like dealing with it. And so I was like, okay, I need to find something different. My take on Finaloop is like, it's the best accounting platform that exists out there. The real time nature of it and being able to see cash flow in real time is like amazing. There's no other platform like it.
Hi, this is Rayla from Finaloop. Join me as I sit down with real brands to hear how they got real-time visibility into the health of their business. These are honest conversations about what works, what doesn't, and why Finaloop became part of their journey. First of all, how is it in general in terms of the onboarding process, the maintaining process? What have you found? I'm really curious about what your experience is with it.
Yeah. So for Inventory IQ in general, I think the first experience that I had with it was when the PO tool came out. And this
Mhm.
was prior to Inventory IQ being as dynamic as it is now. With, understanding vendor rolling terms, understanding where you are from a payment perspective within there of like, I owe this vendor money, I have rolling, credit with them. Especially when you're ordering a lot of stuff like you might have a given rolling balance with any sort of, manufacturer or contract manufacturer that you're working with. And so it's been really helpful to be able to see that very clearly and also just really understand from a financial point of view on a warehouse level, COGS. I don't think there is a more real time platform that exists for big brands, small brands. I think for us, like when we were going to it was really I think like Shopify, what's amazing about Inventory IQ is that it's very approachable whatever stage you're at. And so if you're like a huge ERP type, company and like you want to integrate that, if you kind of started on Inventory IQ, you're almost like, I don't need that as quickly because I have a lot of from an accounting perspective, I understand how much I pay for something, and then I understand kind of like what that looks like on the P&L, and L, and so there that keeps track of it for a very long time, and then especially if you're direct to consumer focused, um, and you're using Shopify, you're using Amazon, all of those things, it makes it even easier because you guys are tracking those units as long as the SKUs are inputted correctly and, everyone's keeping the data clean. It's pretty intuitive and works really, really well. It's something that used to take me and accountants like just forever at the end of the year, during the year, like you was always just a headache, similar to sales tax, I would consider as like calculating COGS. And it's just something that just doesn't exist anymore because you upload the PO and now you basically just understand what that looks like on a P&L level in real time.
Amazing. And how like, I would say, what are the key differences that you find in terms of, let's say, your day-to-day managing inventory on the financial side beforehand versus now? In terms of time, in terms of process, in terms of visibility?
So I think it's a few fold. So I think it's a few things. I think one is probably on a day to day, you used to just have much less clarity into what was going on. So, you'd be like, I don't really know where I am. Like I have a general, you'd look at your like return on ad spend, you'd look on at like how much sales you're driving, and you kind of be like, I know my general margin, I know this, and like give like an eyeball of like, hey, like what do things look like financially? And so you're like, oh, I'm ahead of the curve, I'm not ahead of the curve, but like, maybe you're offering some discount for a period of time that like is some bundle, and you're like, okay, well, shipping should cost X and this should be Y. So I have a general idea of what this will be and like how much I'm making, but you don't really actually know? And then you kind
Yeah.
of see in like a month and a half, you're like, oh, I was right. I was wrong. And in this game, like the 10% or the 5% or whatever it is in either direction matters a ton. One, it's lost potential revenue. If you're doing really well, maybe you could afford to actually acquire more customers where you are by not understanding fully the financial picture you're in. And so you've actually lost out on potential revenue where you could have spent more aggressively. Um, or you have the opposite situation where you're actually in a bad financial position and you're just running, it's almost like you're running from the problem from a financial perspective, and at some point it will all blow up if you're acquiring at a greater cost than you can afford from a lifetime value perspective on that
Mhm.
front. So I think what it's given us specifically is just extreme clarity on like where we are at a given time and as real time as it can physically be.
Okay,
And
amazing.
so that's the first thing. And then I would say the second thing on the day-to-day basis is like I feel like trying to think specifically. I think something I used to spend a lot of time on was actually then going and taking an Excel sheet, calculating COGS, thinking about what our average cost is. We're buying new inventory, like new inventory, now a whole headache of what does that look like from a financial perspective. Okay, it's in the warehouse, it's there, we have 2 warehouses. It's like, okay, well, the costs are different in one. Should we just average cost them? Like, what should we do? And so it's kind of like always everyone has a different opinion, especially depending on the bookkeepers you're talking to. And so I think it was just the overhead admin of like thinking through what we should be doing on a constant basis versus just being like, hey guys, like, what are we doing here? And I think inventory IQ has really, and like your guys' team genuinely, like you answer those questions super quickly, you basically take care of them and you understand things on a warehouse level. So it's super easy to be like, oh, like we actually know COGS on a warehouse level. So I think that's taken a lot off our plate in terms of just thinking through it so that we can focus more on, I would say, growth and marketing and product.
Okay, great. Um, I know you mentioned briefly about the Excel sheet.
Yeah.
What could you tell me a little bit about your process before Inventory IQ, just so I understand, I guess before.
Yeah, sure. So before inventory IQ, I would have a master Excel sheet for COGS. Every PO, I basically have like a SKU on this side. Then I have every PO here by date. And so then I would basically put how many units we, actually received and how much we paid per unit. And I would come up with basically I'd have an Excel sheet with each PO in that master sheet. People on your team have seen it. They laughed at it. As in like because they were like, yeah, this makes sense that you used to do this way. And so basically from that end, at the end of the year, we're like, okay, great. These are all the purchases we made. Or throughout the year, we're like, great. How much have we sold? We'll go into the Shopify, we'll look at the little numbers. We're like, okay, great. We sold this. Oh, we sold this here. We sold this here. Great. Amazing. We gave away these in, videos or whatever it is and to influencers. Amazing. Minus this in the Excel sheet on a SKU level. And then you're like, okay, now I actually have to like calculate that number from a COGS perspective.
Mhm.
And then we would calculate the COGS and then we would have to put that into the P&L. So we would have to upload that either into like your system or QuickBooks prior to that. And then it would usually be like some just dollar value and there was no real insight into what was going on. But that was the process before.
So before you calculated the COGS based on just like an average of everything altogether.
Yeah, exactly.
And about how many hours a month could you spend on updating this Excel or tracking this Excel?
Ooh, good question.
Pick an estimate. Are we talking like 2 hours? Are we talking 10 hours? Are we talking?
I feel like it was for sure like 10 hours
Like 10 hours a
a
month?
month. A month. Yeah, 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 for sure. Like a couple hours a week that I was like, hopping into that sheet, updating things. Um, and then especially like as we sold things, you would kind of want to try and keep it up to date, or you need to have it ready for the bookkeeper to give it to
Yeah.
them. And so like you have to just do it. And even though I didn't necessarily want to, you have to like go and do that. So I would say it's definitely around 10 hours that I spent on it, give or take, a little bit.
Mhm. And what about now? What about how many hours you spend on using on, like, updating information in Inventory IQ?
Oh, I really don't spend time on it at all.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I don't, as in once the POs are in, and like it's really part of the admin of PO ordering now, where it's like, great, we're getting a delivery. This is where it's going. We input it into Finaloop. And so maybe there's a half an hour to an hour that we just make sure all the data is correct. Cause obviously we're apparel. So we have a lot of SKUs on a
Mhm.
given thing. But like otherwise, it's not a lot of time once those POs are in.
Okay, amazing. So overall, it sounds like Inventory IQ has been a huge success for your brand.
Yeah, for sure. Like for us, it's amazing. And it saves a lot of time and just for things that I think it's also just a question of like I like to categorize, like the hours of like time spent by also just enjoyment. And like that's like bottom of the list in terms of like energy suck. Like that is fully there. So I think it's more than I think the specific hours, it's also the quality of hours as well that you save. So it's just hours that I don't have to spend on like rudimentary classic business process that we all have to do as business owners, but
Mhm.
it makes my life a lot easier not having to do that and being able to just work with your team on it.
Okay, great. So I
Yeah,
I guess now I just wanna revisit briefly the overall financial process separate from the Inventory IQ. Obviously,
sure.
they're quite related, but, just to look at more on a robust big picture level. Um,
Yeah.
so again, it's been a while since we last spoke about it. I'm curious how things are going so far in terms of like the everyday process. I know you're happy with Finaloop, which is great. I'm just curious in terms of like the everyday management of your financials. Do you do you still have very specific pinpoints that you're really looking to get better? Or there points that like have maybe like new features have been updated that have been a big help to you, or just sort of as and there been any changes between when we last spoke about this versus how you're using Finaloop now?
No, I think that you know what it is? I think Finaloop has gotten better. I think Finaloop has gotten a lot better in terms of just, like, all of the features. I think the only pain points that I've really had with and this is just specifically for Finaloop, like, this, doesn't have to be included. I'll tell you I'll start over in a second, but basically, like, I would say my only pain points with Finaloop specifically was just that I was on the really early versions, and so every time there was a big update, I had to switch to something new, and so maybe I had to do that 3 times. Now that InventoryIQ exists, like, we are fully there. We were also beta testers for things, so sometimes we would get something
Yes.
set up and then, like, we'd be like, "Why does none of this work again?" And we're like, "Oh, shoot, we have to fix all of this." So that was that, and your team is incredibly helpful in doing that, but that was the only pain points that we've had where we're like, "Why does nothing work anymore?" And then we're like, "Oh, shoot, we were on the last version beta, and no one realized that our account was beta, so we have to just switch over to the new thing." And once we realized that, it's like, "Oh, great, okay, it's fixed," you know? But yeah, that was, I would say, the only pain point that we've had, but, you know, we worked with Lee Raz on your team. That was, like, for closing the books this year, and it was great, very,
Liraz is
very
great,
helpful.
right?
Yeah, really great. So,
Okay, amazing.
yeah.
So, like, I guess in terms of I know that before you joined Finaloop, you were using QuickBooks and had a bookkeeper, right?
Yeah.
If you could maybe just like tell me in, I guess, a short summary, sort of like what your process was before, and what the biggest pain points were that you were looking to change when switching to Finaloop.
So I think a lot of the process was the same, it's just you couldn't really rely on the information. So I think, like, you always kinda, like, squinted at it and were like, I don't know," because QuickBooks just didn't real time reconcile, and so I think that was the biggest and most important thing that got me to start being like, "Okay, like, I don't wanna be on this platform anymore," for QuickBooks, and started looking for other solutions, and because I would, categorize a transaction and then all of a sudden I'd break everything and then everything was in negative, and then I'd be like, "I don't really wanna fix this," and then I talk to a bookkeeper, then they try to fix it, but you kind of messed it up already, and, like, once it was messed up, you're like, "Oh, whatever," like, I don't know, then you have to hire a bookkeeper to, like, keep fixing your mess up that was probably a year ago, but, like, they'll fix it because 'cause they'll reconcile it, but, like, there's still some error that probably happened along the way, and so, like, I think for that is, like, I just had one too many times where I'm like, "This is just so frustrating, and I don't feel like dealing with it." And so I was like, "Okay, I need to find something different." And so that's basically when I went to Finaloop. I would say also, on a process perspective is, like, I would do the same things, there was just less tools to do it. So you were really just, like, uploading your COGS into Finaloop as, like, a, manual expense. And so it would basically be, like, the same sheet that you would utilize, but you would kind of upload it, and they weren't really built for, like, all of the things that even from a COGS perspective, like, you guys were built for. So I had to calculate a lot more. So, like, for example, like, processing fees, like, they were they weren't really taken into account. We just got, like, the transfer amounts in terms of, like, "Oh, this is how much
Mhm.
money you made." So, like, we weren't even really taking that into account because it was, like, finally all, QuickBooks saw was you got this deposit from Shopify versus being like, "Oh, well, that deposit from Shopify is net X percentage points." And really, that's actually a really big percentage of, potentially net that you're giving away because maybe you could be on a different, credit card processing or something like that.
Okay, so meaning before, and I know you had obviously the QuickBooks and all of that. I One of the things that you had said at the point that when you said, "Okay, I need something else," was when you like when you realized the fact that like you just weren't getting real time data and you needed that. I'm
Yeah.
curious because this is something I see with a lot of brands don't necessarily appreciate the importance of real time data, and a lot of times they'll come to Final anyway because they realize that there's a lot of errors or because of other issues or lack of visibility in terms of like the breakdowns. But that real time aspect is something that not everyone understands the importance of. So I'm just curious, like, what was your like aha moment in terms of like, I need something more real time than this? If there was one, if there was like something you're just like, okay, these numbers are not helping me anymore. I need something of today.
Yeah, so I think as any sort of, young e-commerce founder, starts to learn. I think like as any young e-commerce founder kind of starts to learn the difference between profit and cash. And I think when you start to really understand, businesses in which you have to purchase the product prior to delivering the experience, and that as a constant problem of 100%, 50% growth, almost like killing you potentially if you're not set up correctly, on a given month over month. And like if your margin is in a specific place or you're trying to get margin to be better, I think you very quickly realize how much information you need and as quickly as you need it. And so I think as I started really becoming more aware of like how to operate an e-commerce business, I was like, I need as much information as quickly as humanly possible. Um, and yeah, so that's basically when I was like, you know what, like I need something better. And then you guys were like, the first feature I feel like you guys were like big on was real time nature. And so
Hmm.
that was like the first thing that I was like, I need to do this. Basically switch to Finaloop and then never look back.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
don't know if
this
that
has
answered
been
your question.
yes, no, it did, and it was perfect. Because one of the things we always try to talk about a lot, like a lot of our content and things like that, is the importance of cash flow versus profitability. Like you might be profitable, but if you can't pay your bills, your business is still gonna die.
Yeah. And there's always this cycle of like, there's this cycle of over inventory, under inventory, over inventory, under inventory that I think most brands who have inventory experience. The question is like, how are you able to deal with that? And like first and foremost, like how are you making your decisions on what is the biggest one-way door within the business, which is inventory purchasing. Like you can either live or die by your inventory purchasing as an e-com brand, as a direct to consumer brand, or any brand that holds inventory. And so you could be the most amazing business on the planet. You over inventory yourself, like you are shooting yourself in the foot from the perspective of being able to invest into that equal part marketing investment of selling the product. And then if you can't sell the product, you have too much product that you spend too much money on. Now you're in a really big predicament because you're stuck with too much product and you don't have money to market it to get it off your balance sheet. That's a sticky situation. So
No, that
you really need as much information as possible to understand, you know, where you are at any given time. And I think like Final really helps with that.
amazing.